Hello, this is Langdon Winter, and welcome back to our class in Design, Culture, and Society. I hope that all is well with your family and friends, and that you've had a acceptably pleasant spring break despite the chaos which has enveloped us. Under these extraordinary conditions, I'm now living with my wife in social distancing mode, trying to avoid as much direct human contact as possible. So that means I spend a lot of time on the computer and cell phone talking to people at great distance. So in that mode, I'll continue teaching design, culture, and society until the end of the term. And on short notice, I'm trying to learn some new software to facilitate the process. So forgive me if I'm a little awkward working in this particular setting. You'll see, for example, that I'll occasionally pause in my discussion to read my notes on the screen and do battle with the technology. You and I will have to make some adaptations to the syllabus, to our activities and the course requirements. I've announced some of these already by email. We'll have our own Gmail address to talk to each other. One important change is that the term project for the term has been canceled. And I know that many of you will be terribly disappointed by that, but we'll have to make do with that. The credit for the term project will be replaced by an additional quiz. But you'll get full credit for the work on the term project that you've done so far. In that category, everyone will get an A. Soon I'll be sending around to each of you individually the results of the first exam for the term, both the short answer questions and your essays. So you'll be receiving that by email. Soon also I'll send around a revised, reorganized syllabus of our readings and discussions. I hope you've already noticed that there is that new email address, Gmail address for our various communications. So what I'm going to do today is to offer the first of a series of video lectures focused upon the readings. The book we're going to cover right now is Game Changer, The Techno-Scientific Revolution in Sports by Ray Fouche. Ray Fouche is an old friend of mine. We've taught together. He's a noted scholar in the field of science and technology studies. For example, he's the editor, co-editor of the Handbook of STS that summarizes the current theories and research findings in this multidisciplinary field of scholarship. What he does in Game Changer is to look at the infusions of science and technology in various kinds of competitive sports. There are basically two tracks of his inquiry, which you'll notice as you start reading. One has to do with the presentation of a theoretical framework that enables him to interpret the topic. The second track has to do with a collection of case studies on particular sports, soccer, track, swimming, basketball, and others. So when you may find the abstract theory is getting a little thick, take heart, because there are some fascinating stories about athletics coming your way. It's important to notice in that regard that Ray Fouche is both a first-rate scholar and in his younger days a prominent athlete, a competitive cyclist who knew the best cycle racers in the field at the time. He writes in his book, "It's the motor, not the machine." And he goes on to say that as a competitive cyclist in the late 1980s and through the mid-1990s, I came to speak that phrase regularly. It became a familiar mantra that my compatriots and I would systematically repeat. Put simply, this saying means that one's body, the motor, is vastly more important than any technoscientific device, pharmaceutical treatment, or psychological condition in the final outcome of a cycling race. In hindsight, I repeated this phrase to others and myself out of my own hubris, ignorance, and most importantly, denial. This overly self-confident utterance by an aspiring 20-something athlete should not come as a shock, because a large part of elite competitive sports is about sustaining an unwavering, often illogical belief in oneself. It is a belief in the superiority and infallibility of one's body that undergirds this way of thinking. And he goes on to say that by the 1990s, like most sports, experienced a techno-scientific explosion ranging from lightweight compositives like carbon fiber to stretchy wind-cheating fabrics like elastane. Also during this period, sport began to embrace scientific rigor that physicians, psychologists, and scientists brought to training, to nutrition, and competitive preparation. These scientific pathways, like the broader society as a whole, progressed at a quickening and uncomfortable pace. So he says that athletes like myself began to wonder whether these techno-scientific evolutions would become revolutions, with techno-scientific overshadowing the corporeal, to a point where athletic competitions would no longer be between athletes on the field, but between scientists and technologists in the laboratory. So it's important to notice that the kind of analysis that Ray Fouche presents could be applied to other fields of human activity as they are affected by the development and use of new technology. So for example, you could look at the workplace today, both in offices, factories, and so forth, that are being reshaped by automation and artificial intelligence. So many of the same perspectives and categories and lessons apply. So how does one's experience as a worker change as new kinds of hardware and software are introduced to the workplace? One crucial dimension of Fouche's work has to do with what is generally called progress or improvement. So a new device or chemical or computer program is proposed for common use, and its advocates argue that it's an obvious advance, an obvious improvement, and ought to be immediately put to use. One crucial dimension of Ray Fouche's work has to do with questions about progress and improvement. It's often true, for example, that the social practices, social roles, and social organizations that are affected by the changes have their own ideas about what constitutes an improvement as compared to effects that are of a different kind, perhaps of an ominous kind. So one important question that Ray Fouche raises has to do with the various groups that are affected by changes in technoscience. The different social groups may have different judgments, different stories, different narratives about what is taking place. So over the past 50 years or so, sports have undergone massive technoscience transformations that fans and athletes and governing bodies, equipment manufacturers, laboratories, and so forth have brought to the game. So you have these different groups, again, the fans, the athletes, the governing bodies. In baseball, it would be the major leagues that establish the rules and conditions. Also, you have the equipment manufacturers, which might also include the laboratories that come up with new materials, new devices, new methods which enter into sports. So the question comes up, what's a valuable, helpful improvement? And what is a setback or perhaps even a menace? What's fair competition and what's unfair? So the key issue that underlies much of the discussion in the book has to do with integrity. The integrity of various social commitments that underlie the basic practices and performances within a given field. A good case of a controversy about integrity came to professional baseball about 25 years ago. For many decades, the record for the most home runs hit in a season was about 60. Later, one year there was a player, Roger Maris, who hit 61 home runs, which broke the famous Babe Ruth record of 60 home runs in a season. Then, all of a sudden, in the late 1990s, the early 2000s, there was a group of hitters, baseball hitters, that could knock 65, 66, even 70 or 73 home runs over the fence. That included Jose Canseco, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, and ultimately the great Barry Bonds. These guys were big, muscular. It turns out all of them were also juicing, that is, taking anabolic steroids, human growth hormones, and so forth. So the baseballs during that period, 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, were literally flying out of the park. If you tune in today to Wikipedia, the article on list of banned substances in baseball, you'll see literally dozens and dozens of chemicals that the players back then were taking to build up their strength so that they could hit more home runs. And as you probably know, right now there is careful testing and monitoring of baseball players to make sure that these illegal substances are no longer part of the game. As you read the book, you'll see that Fouche is interested in other ways that athletes employ to enhance their performance beyond taking of illegal chemical substances. You'll see that he talks about new kinds of sports equipment, new fabrics, all kinds of things that athletes use to enhance their performance. So the question is, well, when does this make a difference? When do we care? When do we decide what's okay and what's banned? So you can look at other fields of performance, virtuosity in various human pursuits. A field of performance that means a lot to me is that of music. I know it is for lots of you in this class as well, and especially the kinds of performance that one sees live, let's say in an auditorium or a concert hall. My own instrument is that of piano. I'm not a very good player, but I enjoy the instrument. So let's say one day I announced a solo concert for piano at MPAC, and let's say a large crowd gathered there, and I came out on the stage. There's a grand piano there, and I sat down and moved my hands up and down the keyboard, and out came the sounds of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, played with ultimate perfection. But unfortunately, the sound came from a recording of a first-rate concert pianist over hidden speakers, not from me myself. And of course, people would say, well, the performance was just a phony. It was totally devoid of any artistic integrity. And those who caught on to this fact would be perfectly justified in booing me off the stage. So in the context of basic theory and historical documentation in technology studies, Fouche looks at a wide range of controversy about integrity in sports within a wide range of categories of sports competition. So that's what basically the book is about. He lays out a theory. He looks at a wide variety of cases for you to consider. But basically, he's interested in the way that technoscience enters into and then disrupts the integrity of sports competition. And to conclude this little talk today, let me give you a story from a time when Ray and I were teaching a course very much like this one. Let me see if we have here. No, I don't have. Oh, here we go. No, I don't have Ray's photograph to show you. You can find it on Google Images. Look for Fouche. There he will be. Anyway, at the time, we were teaching this course. And there were a number of, at that moment, a number of top-level cyclists, athletes, for example, in the Tour de France and other major races that were being caught and disqualified for doping. And you may remember that I mentioned that Ray Fouche was one of the elite cyclists of an earlier period. So one day in teaching this class, I said, Ray, isn't it interesting that while so many great athletes in cycling are being apprehended, found to be cheating in the sport, Lance Armstrong, the best of them all, has never been caught. So he must be truly exceptional in his athletic ability, because all these athletes are being tested repeatedly, and Lance Armstrong has never been caught. It's all the more reason to admire his great skill. And Ray looked at me and said, Langdon, don't kid yourself. They were all doping. And the implication was, although he didn't state it, he's a very modest person, the implication I took from his remark was that somehow Lance Armstrong had cleverly hidden the techno-scientific aids that had helped him achieve prominence. And indeed, as you'll see in Chapter 5 of Game Changer, Ray looks at the evidence about Lance Armstrong in careful detail. I won't tell you what he comes up with, but it's a interesting mystery story that he unravels. Okay, so this is the end of the first lecture of Design, Culture, and Society. I invite you to go onto the new website. I'll send around that link to you again. And for an upcoming session, I'll continue giving lectures on various parts of Fouche's book. But I would ask you to send me, from your own reading, a comment on the reading, as you've always put on your 3x5 cards, and also a question that you would like me to address. So some of these sessions where you tune in to YouTube, what you'll find are my responses to your comments and questions. Okay, I hope this records properly. I see we've got about 20 minutes. That's a pretty good length. And I'll talk to you again soon.